If you are watching this live, or sorry, not live, if you're watching this after the fact, this is the recorded version, you can go ahead and fast forward a couple minutes. We're just kind of going to be filling some space here while people jump in. Don't really have anything. Aaron, maybe you can answer this question since you didn't answer it on Sunday morning. But if you were to become the host of a late night show, who would be your first guest?
Living or dead?
Let's do living for now, because that was a lot of people's interpretation of it in the beginning.
That's a good question. A living person. Who would I interview? Living person. Is it an entertainment show? I got a lot of caveats now.
Well, I mean, it's a late night show, so you can make it what you want.
Okay.
Miss you too, Nicole.
I have no idea. No idea.
So if it helps, my answer was one that attempted to boost ratings, for better or for worse. So my thought was getting Elon Musk as the first guest, because every time he's on a talk show of some kind, he creates controversy and people talk about it. So that was and I think he's a really interesting person.
Yeah. I would want someone that I could learn something from. But if it's the first, so it'd be the first, not the only. But it'd have to be somebody that
just either the very first person or who would be one of the first few people that are on the first show, rather.
It's tone setting. My goodness. Yeah, I don't have a good answer. If there's a dead person, I've got a good answer, but
not enough interesting alive people.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I got nothing. I literally have nothing.
That's funny. Well, cool. We've got
all sorts of dead people.
All sorts of we got a few of you guys on here, so that's great to see. So what these live streams are kind of going to be about is we're at least going to have the next 3 weeks. So this is the first of 3 weeks of walking through, or we're calling them Awake My Soul conversations. And so today, what we're going to be talking about is something that we've been teaching on or going through over the last few weeks on our Sunday live stream called the Circle. And so it's a tool that we've been using quite specifically in leadership here at United, but it has kind of seeped its way through everything that we do. And so we want to now kind of hand that over and equip that circle and that tool to everyone else. Andy said Richard Rohr would be the person that he would interview for the very first.
You know what? I think I might actually interview Bezos, but as a way of holding his feet to the fire about somebody with so much money.
So you just want to be in Congress?
No. No, but why what is he using his money for good for? Mm-hmm. And how does he make those decisions and those selections as someone who makes $1 billion a day?
That would be that'd be interesting to hear his thought process on for someone that will never want for anything, what does that person choose to spend their money on? That'd be really interesting.
But specifically from a philanthropic point of view. Mm-hmm. Not how he spends it, but how he chooses to give it away. And if he does, he does a little bit, but how and why and all that stuff.
Yeah, that would be really interesting. Yeah. Cool. So, kind of what we're going to look through, kind of to lay out the live stream for you all today, is this first little part. Aaron and I are going to kind of teach and walk through and explain what the circle actually is. We'll talk about what a Kairos moment is. So that is something we actually haven't touched on yet. We've kind of hinted at it. We talk about big moments. We'll kind of explain what Kairos moments actually are. And then we will talk about Aaron and I's experience learning about the circle and kind of how we initially interpreted it, or rather reacted to it. And then we'll move into kind of how we use it today, if we still use it today, and how has it been helpful, and so on and so forth. Cool. So that's kind of the layout for today. So what the circle is it's a tool that we can use to guide us through these Kairos moments. And so what a Kairos moment is they are these moments, not necessarily large, not necessarily small. It's not necessarily about the impact, but it impacts you or changes you in some way, shape, or form. It can be spiritually, financially, physically, emotionally, or socially. And so, like, let's say a very obvious one would be like losing your job, or a smaller one would be something happens at the grocery store when you're like standing in line and someone does something, like let's say they bump into you for whatever reason, and you feel in yourself react very strongly to that. So that would be a Kairos moment. So that's a moment that happened that you reacted in some way that you don't necessarily know why. And so what the circle does is it creates this tool or this process for you to go through this and kind of, well, process it. And so we split the circle into two halves. The first is listening, and the second is acting or making a plan. And this is all with the understanding that God is still speaking and that we can still listen and hear from him. And I thought it was interesting when I was thinking through this in the car driving around today. By saying listening and acting doesn't mean that just the acting side is actually active. Both sides are active. And so on the first half of listen, we're asking the question, or the overarching question, what is God saying to you? So that's kind of the first half of the circle. And so you observe what happened. You kind of you just state the facts of this is what happened. These were the circumstances surrounding it. And then you reflect, and you begin to ask the questions of why. So why did I react this way? Why did this happen? And then the third is going to be discuss. So this is where, after we've done some observing, done some reflecting, we then discuss it in a trusted circle of friends. So it could be one friend, two friends, three friends, so forth, whatever you're comfortable with. I know Aaron and I are in a group that there are 5 of us. And so we go through these Kairos moments or these circles amongst 5 of us. It's not a magical number, but that's the number that we kind of operate and exist in. And on this side of the circle, so the listening side of asking, what is God saying to you? That can take any amount of time. It kind of depends on the size of the Kairos moment, right? Like how deep of the deconstruction do you want to go? So like this is the side of you're kind of like tearing it apart, peeking at it, taking a look at what happened and why it happened. And you're deconstructing. And so that can take any amount of time. So it could be days, weeks, months, years. I know me personally, I have a Kairos moment that took me about, I didn't know about it at the time because I didn't really know what the circle was during the season, but it took me 4 years probably or so to kind of do that listening side of things. And then just recently I'm kind of back on the upswing of actually taking action and reconstructing everything. And so in the first half, we kind of go there. And then the second half is acting. And so the first on the bottom is making a plan. So these are plans that are SMART goals. If you ever heard of SMART goals in like business situations or corporate situations, I actually can never, do you know the actual acronym of each one, Aaron, by chance, of
yes.
SMART?
Yep. The S is all of a sudden throwing me off. I think it's strategic.
Strategic, yeah.
And then it's measurable, attainable,
realistic
and
timely. Yeah. It's the S that always, I think strategic. Like, specific. There's someone just put it in the comments, specific.
That was it.
Yes, thanks so much. It says Facebook user. I don't know who it is, but
it's Tracy. It's gotta be.
So these are, when we begin to make a plan, you want to make SMART plans or SMART goals in this season, because the reason we try to walk through the circle is we are experiencing something that is so overwhelming that we need a structure to be able to go through it or to process it. And so we want to create plans or goals that you can actually accomplish and are not overwhelmed by the plans themselves. And then you make your way into actually acting. And so you actually act upon the plan that you devised with the community that you are a part of. And that community then holds you accountable to keeping these plans. And so you kind of go back and forth between like listening and acting. And the acting side, I forgot to mention. So the listening is what is God saying to you, and then the acting is what are you going to do about it? And so that's kind of at its core, it's asking those two questions. What is God saying to you, and what are you going to do about it? So that's kind of the circle in a nutshell. If you've been watching our live streams for the last few weeks, you would have heard that. I know a few of you are part of a group, part of a huddle that is kind of walking through that. For some of you, this may be the very first time that you're hearing about it. Aaron, is there anything that you would add to kind of that explanation or teaching of it?
I think what's really important to know is that sometimes the smallest Kairos moments can sometimes be the most powerful. Like you gave the example of just like being in the grocery store, right? And this thing happened. Sometimes those things can end up being the most powerful, but there's actually something that God wants you to pay attention to in that moment, in that season. And it unravels an awful lot for you. And you see a lot of priorities or a lot of actions that you take in your life. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, this has some pretty far reaching effects. I remember perhaps one of the more powerful ones for me that still sits with me. We walked through this as a huddle probably 2 years ago. It was, I still remember the day. I was walking across Mercer right by QFC, crossing over towards the Gates Foundation. And there was a gentleman with some grocery bags, and I was running late and was just kind of like getting to get to a coffee appointment. And this gentleman was walking across the street, made it all the way across, and his bags just ripped out from underneath him. And it happened right in front of me. I watched it happen. I was like, oh, that really sucks. Normally, you would think, oh, you should probably stop and help this person pick everything up. He just collapsed to the ground and sat there, frazzled by what had happened. But he literally sat down, and I just walked on by. Because I was late, because I needed to get somewhere. So instead of being, like I was going to be 5 minutes late anyways, instead of being 10 minutes late and texting somebody later, I could have stopped and done something. But what was it? Like, what was the Kairos moment for me was like, why didn't I stop? Why did I feel so beholden to this time frame, to this clock, as opposed to what was taking place in front of me right there? And it set a whole new way of understanding time and people and opportunity than perhaps I had recognized before. So like even these small little moments could become these really big and important moments in our lives.
Yeah, and those are that's the God speaking in a whisper versus like the storm, right? Or the whatever.
Exactly.
It's those moments. And I think, that's the thread that begins to unwind the deeper Kairos moment or the deeper thing that is going on. Because these bigger ones, although those are not necessarily easy to take apart, but sometimes they're overwhelming to take apart, right? Like you don't know where to begin. And I know I've been there, like you've got so many, and I think a lot of us are in this season, like there's so many things going on, like where do you start? But I think, these smaller ones where you react in a way that you're like, wait a minute, I normally would not react that way. Like, why did I do that? And I think what's cool about using the circle is it kind of helps you be intentional in, someone said hi, Forrest. Yeah, he's crying there in the background. It kind of shows us or teaches us how to be intentional and active with everything in our lives. not just the big moments, the kind of, the mountains and the valleys. It's everything in between that like we can kind of react to.
Absolutely.
Or approach. So I know you and we learned about this circle. Gosh, this must have been at least 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Wasn't quite 2.5. It was like we're well past 2 years as a church now. We're at like 2.5 as a church. So give or take 2.5 years, give or take 6 months. So what were some of your kind of initial reactions to learning about the circle?
I thought it was awful. It was awful. I wanted nothing to do with it, which again was actually a Kairos moment that we walked through as a group, which was so fascinating. But I wanted nothing to do with it because I didn't want to have to pay that close attention to everything that was going on in my life. I didn't want to be that intentional with the moves that were happening and that were taking place. I believed it was, I did more than give lip service to the belief that God is still speaking, but I only wanted to selectively hear. And the circle for me was this moment of really pressing in to say, no. Like God is still speaking, and God is speaking all the time. And a lot of times we just don't want to listen to it, or we miss it. We brush aside that thing. And the circle was this moment of really helping me to see the level and the extent to which God is still speaking. And so for me, I pushed against it pretty hard. And our group did a tremendous job of helping me process through that, of walking through it, and then seeing how beneficial and how good of a tool this is just in everyday life. It was super wonderful for me.
What do you think or if you remember, what was the kind of turning point that went from thinking it was awful to, I don't want to say enjoying it, but appreciating it maybe?
Yeah, I honestly, and maybe that's why I still remember that moment. It's the gentleman with the bags. I think for me, that was really the moment. And it was, I don't know, it was weeks after we had walked through learning about what the circle was. And it was, because every week we start off our group with this idea of like, what are the Kairos moments that you want to process? And that was the question. I was like, you know what? I'm just going to lean into this one because this one stuck out to me for some reason. But it went on a completely different tangent than I had ever expected it to go. And the things that I learned about myself, the things that I learned about how God is interjecting in moments in my life was like that was not just a Kairos moment, but it's a paradigm shift. That moment created a gigantic paradigm shift for me. And I think that's when it turned, was actually in the midst of processing a Kairos moment. It
was seeing its benefits being played out in real time. And kind of appreciating it from there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think for me, I can't remember exactly what my reactions were, but I think if I'm remembering right, I appreciated the tool. Because as someone, so to give a insight into my personality, I am the type of person that will like Google icebreaker questions in order to like have small talk conversation. Or I have to like learn the questions that you need to ask to have small talk because I hate small talk. And this is not even a joke. Like I remember so when I met Talissa, she's like great at asking questions. Like she's one of the best question askers I've ever met. And so I remember around the first times learning, she actually like taught me how to like ask questions or ask questions that are open-ended or ask questions that have a number, or different things like that, like in order to engage in small talk conversation. And so for me to have a tool to walk through these intellectual crises that I seem to constantly have, was very comforting, because it finally gave me, because especially in that season, I think in that season 2.5 years ago, I was in the middle of deconstructing a lot of things. And so I didn't know when or how to begin rebuilding what I was tearing apart. And so, and if you're not careful, or if you aren't intentional with your deconstruction, you just tear things apart. You tear it apart, tear it apart, tear it apart until you have nothing left. And then honestly, you don't feel any better. Like, you still feel awful, and the world is still awful because you just finished tearing it apart. So this tool, what I like about it is, on the first side, it gives space to do the deconstruction.
And permission, even. Like, there's a permission.
Yeah. There's a permission, and then it's done in community, and it's done in groups, so other people can speak into it. Because I know there have been times, like when we have had Kairos moments and we talked about it as a group, that we end up finding out more information when we share it with other people, because they can speak into that moment and say, like, oh, what do you think about this? Or why do you think this happened? Or let's dig into this a little bit deeper. Or I think you're actually avoiding this question, and like, you really probably should start to think about it, or dig into it. And then and on the second side, it gives you the space and the tools to begin the reconstruction and the taking action and the rebuilding of everything that you just tore apart. So yeah, I think that's kind of like I remember initially it felt very formulaic's not the word I want to use, but like it felt too structured, so it didn't feel organic enough. And I think I remember that as you know, as we were going through it, that's kind of like, we would have to, as we were learning it, like go through each step, because it wasn't like embedded or embodied in us yet. Like, we were still going through, like, I remember, this is how I remember the 6 steps. You know where I'm going, right? Yeah, so the 6 steps, so if you've been a part of one of our huddles, or if you're curious how it kind of functions in these, like, teaching of these circles or these tools, is you have your leader that teaches it, and then the following 3 weeks, people within the group will teach that shape or that tool. And so the week that I was teaching the circle, I was trying to come up with some kind of mnemonic device, because that's how I graduated high school, was mnemonic devices. And so I was trying to come up with some kind of mnemonic device to remember the observe, reflect, discuss, plan, act, and account. And what I said was Orlando, Pennsylvania, which is funny in 2 ways, because Pennsylvania, and then 2, ORD is actually not the name for Orlando, it's Chicago.
Airport codes.
Airport codes, yeah.
Yeah.
And so, but in my error, I have never forgotten Orlando, Pennsylvania.
And neither have I.
Exactly. It was helpful. Hey, if a mnemonic device gets the job done and helps you remember, doesn't matter what it actually is.
I'll never forget how to walk through the circle.
Yeah, exactly.
I think what's really great about that, though, too, is like this idea of, like, when we first walked into it, it felt very static. And like, it's just like, this is what it is, and that's all you've got. You can't do anything else with this thing. But as you begin to process it, you learn just how dynamic of a tool it is, and how dynamic the conversation gets. That it actually spins us off into so many different opportunities and possibilities for discovering more about who we are, as well as more about who God is. Like, it's beautiful in that respect.
Yeah, because I think when we were first learning about it, we would think of it as like step 1, step 2, step 3, like so linear. But in reality, like, it's very fluid. Like, you start on one side and you swing over here, you take an action, right? You make a plan, you act on it, and then hold you accountable. But then you might have a Kairos moment within that plan, right? Within that acting, you have your own Kairos moment. And so then you go right back to the beginning and you kind of start all over. And so that's why these can take so long to go through. Because the more you dig, the deeper you go, and kind of the more you discover.
Sometimes they turn into loop-de-loops.
Yeah. It kind of just continues, and because it's on a line, right? So like in the actual, like if we were to draw it out, there's a line, and then you draw the circle here, and this line being time. and what is time anymore. But you have line being time, and then you kind of go through these constant Kairos moments where you're constantly circling and circling and you never really arrive either, right? Like that's not, the point of this tool isn't to arrive at spiritual enlightenment. Like that's not the goal. The goal is to have a tool or have a process to go through moments that you reacted heavily to or in some way to. With that, what are, how have you continued to use the circle in like either day-to-day life or larger moments, or kind of what is the influence of the circle in your life at the moment? Not necessarily like what are certain ones, but like how are you using it?
Yeah. I think what's interesting is it has become, because it's been 2 years of this being reinforced, and especially in light of like the huddle, like always feeling a need to come to huddle with a Kairos moment of something. So it has given me new radar in terms of like scanning life and moments of like, oh, that's a thing. I think it's become so ingrained in what I do now that I don't really think about it much. Like I don't think about the process, but I certainly, or at least how I go through the process. It just kind of happens. And oftentimes I will, I was watching, so Elliot was watching the Star Wars Clone Wars on probably Disney Plus.
Disney Plus, probably.
Yeah. The cartoon one. And Darth Maul had a quote, like said something, and I was like, what? Like, that's really good. And I kept running it through in my mind. I kept running it through. I don't know. The show probably passed like 3 or 4 minutes, and I grabbed the remote and I said, sorry, I got to rewind that. I got to hear that again. And they're like, okay. I rewound it. I listened to it, and I went over to the table and I scribbled down the quote because I was like, I've got to hear this again, and I'm gonna play with this. I'm gonna process it. Like it clicked something within me. I'm not quite sure what it is yet, right? But I have observed something, and I'm still in that kind of like reflective mode of like, what is this? And no, granted, this isn't anything that I've taken to anybody, right? I haven't begun the communal process. I'm beginning that process of like just beginning to needle down into some of the weeds of why did that sit with me. Especially the quote itself was, justice is merely a construct of the, never mind. It's like merely a construct of the power structures, of the current power structures. And I'm sitting here thinking like, that's Darth Maul saying that, right? Like what on earth? Like that's, to me, it was like the guy that is evil, like all of a sudden is now like, is he just a product of a system? Like, so it, like even that, like his storyline has like changed for me, and I'm like, oh, that's fascinating. But it's more about who else would that apply to? Why does that apply? Like all those sorts of things. Like it's needling down. So I think there are moments where it plays.
Yeah, and the circle gives you the space to kind of notice that, first of all, like learning how to identify that, like, oh, that was a moment that like I should tuck away and think about later, or talk with someone, or kind of work through, because you begin to notice these things. So rather than just reacting and then kind of moving on, you react and then pause, and it's a more of a what's the word? Not necessarily contemplative, but aware. You're kind of aware of your surroundings more. And someone said that Elliot should watch Avatar: The Last Airbender, and I don't disagree. That is so. Aaron, you and I were talking the other day about Breaking Bad being one of like the greatest television shows of all time. Talissa and I are going through it I'm going through it for the third time. She's watching it for the second time. And Avatar: The Last Airbender is probably number 2. Whoa. 2 or 3. Like it is. So the reason we're going way off a tangent here, but the reason Breaking Bad is so good is character development, right? So like you start with Walt in the beginning, and over 5 seasons you see him evolve. You start with Jesse in the beginning, and over 5 seasons you see him devolve. And like as they constantly insert characters, their arcs are very crucial to the storyline. Avatar: The Last Airbender is the exact same way. Like the character development from when you first meet Aang as this like 12-year-old kid who's just a jokester that just wants to ride on the backs of penguins, to eventually the end of the show. I won't ruin it because I know there may be some people watching that don't appreciate spoilers, even though the show's in 4:3 and 12 years old. But anyways, like the story arcs of these characters are so good that it is worth even adults watching. So I am someone that I notice the 4:3 and I'm a very visual person. Like when I'm watching Breaking Bad, I'm taking note of like the color grade and like how colors are influencing like the storytelling. So this Avatar: The Last Airbender is in 4:3, but I never notice it because it's so captivating that I'm completely ignoring the fact that 2/3 of my screen are not even being utilized.
So here, I can bring it back. I can make this all apply as a tangent that is not a tangent. So all of these, like in every single one of these, like every single character in all of these shows have their own Kairos moments, right? And they either choose to deal with them or they choose to brush right on past them. And I think we all have that option as well. And like there are moments that happens. But when we enter the circle, it's an opportunity for us to take control of our story. It's an opportunity for us to figure out what is actually happening in our lives instead of just coasting along or falling into chaos. And I think the moment, I don't know the name of the other character, but the moment that Darth Maul said what he said, there was another character that he was saying it to, and she was just standing there, and you could see in her face this idea of like, oh, what is just happening? Like there was a Kairos moment for her there. She chose to brush right past it, right? So like there like we can brush past all of these things, or we can take control of our story and enter into the circle and begin to process through them and do it with others.
For sure.
Because it's not supposed to be by ourselves.
It's a circle because it's meant and built and designed to be done in community. So Christy has a question here. I don't know if it'll show up on the screen. There it goes. How much time passed from when Aaron heard about the circle before the grocery bag incident happened? And I think it cuts off there. And did it become the first Kairos moment that you brought to Huddle? So do you remember like when you first learned about the circle and the time between then and when it actually...
It was... I mean, I was so resistant to it. It was... I'm sure that it wasn't the first that I brought. No,
I think it was... I can't remember if we were still teaching the circle or if we had moved on to another tool at that point.
We had certainly moved on. But it was the most impactful because I think it was the first one that I submitted to the process.
Yeah.
So I think there are others that had happened before that. So I don't know, maybe a couple of months, like in terms of like time frame. It was probably a couple of months, but but the ones that I had brought previously, I had not submitted myself to the process.
And I think you were still fighting it and refusing to go through it.
Yeah, and that was the one that like I submitted to the process because there was something. Different about it.
Yeah, and if I don't remember the exact details, I remember it being in the summer, I think. That happening, and we learned about the circle probably in like it wasn't raining, and I think it was probably March or so when we learned about it. So it was probably a good 3 months. But I think if the details that I'm kind of remembering is that was the moment that you recognized a Kairos moment, and then the group helped you walk through it and like kept pestering and asking questions. And so that's where I think the community aspect of this is so important because it gets hard. Like these questions can be really hard to deal with, especially if you're not one who is used to kind of like processing emotions or kind of thinking critically on things. Like if you're not used to doing some of this stuff, it can be really hard and really easy to check out. Like you can kind of begin the work and then check out because you don't have any accountability to people holding you to it. And this is where we get into like high invite, high challenge, which is another tool that we'll save for another day. But in these moments, we as a community challenge one another to dig into it and not give up on it, and continue the work. There's invite and challenge and all that, which is another thing for another day.
The grocery bag thing, we walked through that for probably 3 weeks.
It was a while,
So it wasn't like we didn't solve the whole thing. Like the Kairos moment didn't come to its completion in 1 week, right? It was like 2-3 weeks later, and it was just constant check-in. Like, hey, how you doing with that? Oh, that sucks.
Yeah, and if I remember, like, and even not necessarily this specific, but just in general too, like, there may go like, because we were meeting weekly at the time, and it may go like 3 weeks where like, or 1 week you're just like, yeah, I don't really have anything, like I haven't really gone anywhere with it, nothing really new has developed, and that's fine. And that's kind of where the group will kind of either hold you accountable to if you made a plan and didn't act on it. Like, well, we can be like, well, why didn't you act on it? Or like, what stopped you? Was it like your time too busy, or is it something deeper than that? And I think that's
kind of
let it
marinate sometimes, right?
Yeah, like you're not going to solve your everything overnight or in 1 week, but there will come. I know there are times for us, for me, that there are these like times that things just click and everything just all of a sudden makes sense. And then that's kind of when you begin to make the healing reconstruction process, and kind of move forward from there. Right. So yeah, I think, for me, how I kind of still use it is very similar. Like especially in the season we are now, where like everything is so intense. There have been times where I remember it must have been a week or so ago where I was just so agitated. Like I was fine in the beginning of the day, like in the morning I was fine, but then by like mid-morning, like afternoon, everything was agitating. And I had no idea why. And so what the circle kind of allows is you grow that muscle of noticing those moments. And then B, like for Talissa and I being married, the two of us in community can kind of walk through those moments, especially like when it's for this moment, it was like very marriage specific. It wasn't necessarily marriage specific, but it affected our marriage, right? Like by me being agitated, that affected the both of us. And when you're working from home and you have no way to escape and you don't like whatever. So what the circle has kind of allowed us to do is we both had an understanding of what that looks like, so that together we could walk through this moment and kind of ask those type of questions. And so when she's asking me questions, I know it's coming from a place of love in helping me go through that process. And in community, like it doesn't have to be a group of people, and it doesn't have to necessarily be a marriage relationship. It can be a group of people that these people are choosing to be in relationship with you because they love you. And so when they ask these hard questions and they push in and they challenge you, they're doing it because they love you and because they care about you and they want you to kind of work through these Kairos moments. So,
absolutely.
Yeah. I don't have, if anyone has, if you're watching, if anyone has any questions that you want to throw in the comments, we'll answer those in the next few minutes. Aaron, is there anything else that you would add to this conversation as we kind of wrap up?
I think one of the things, the video that you did that we show on Sundays, going back and just reviewing that at some point, like, do we have a link to that? Is that on the YouTube page? Is that where that's at?
That'll be on all of our live streams on Facebook. It hasn't been posted as its own tool yet, but we can go ahead and do that. So I will be posting that. I'll go ahead and do that after this. So if you want to go to our Facebook page, or we'll just do Facebook because Instagram has weird limitations. So go to Facebook or YouTube. I'm assuming if you're watching this, you're on one of those two. And so you can find that teaching there. where I kind of like walk through and draw out the actual circle with words and so on.
And even just watch it a few times, right? Like go come back to it in a few days kind of thing. I think that would be a good way of just kind of seeing it over and over as a way of like, even though it's the same video, it's what, 2.5 minutes, 3 minutes long. I mean, it's
give or take, yeah.
But like that's kind of the idea behind that video and that tool is an opportunity to just kind of familiarize yourself with it more and more. I think that'd be really good as just a way of understanding more this process and this thing, especially if you're new to it. If this is something brand new that you're like, I have no idea what's going on here.
Yeah, that will give you a better, if you're like a visual learner, right, seeing it kind of played out. I make mention of a lot of those phrases. There's some things that I don't talk about in that video because I only had like 2 minutes, 3 minutes to do it. So like the observe, reflect, discuss, plan, act, account. Those 6 words are not in that teaching that I give, but the listen, act, what is God saying to you? What are you going to do about it? Those things are on that circle and on that video. So go ahead and check that video out. That will help kind of frame these next few weeks as we kind of walk through this tool. And everyone should go watch Avatar: The Last Airbender because it's a really good show. I think it's coming to Netflix soon. No, it is on Netflix. Never mind. It's The Legend of Korra that's coming to Netflix soon, which is like the sequel to. It's not as good, but they gave it to us. They at least gave it to us.
Just a quick judgment right there. It's not as good. Just don't even bother.
It's not. If you read any review on it, basically everyone's response to The Legend of Korra is like, thanks for making it because we wanted something, but like it's still not as good as the first one. There may be someone out there that disagrees, but
basically what you're saying is the minute that you've binged everything that everyone has told you to binge, then you should watch this show.
Then you can watch The Legend of Korra. Once you kind of reach like the top 5 shows of all time, then you can kind of move on.
That's fair. That's fair. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks everyone for hopping in today. It is a pleasure to be with you, even in this online space. And we will continue to do this on, what is today? Tuesday? Tuesdays at 4:00. So every Tuesday at 4:00 for the next 2 weeks, at least, we'll be having these conversations. And
next week you're going to walk me through.
Yeah. So what the next 2 weeks will look like is Aaron and I will actually be going through a Kairos moment. So we will bring a Kairos moment to this live stream. So Aaron will go next week. He will have a moment, either experience in the next week, or maybe one, even the one that you just mentioned about Darth Maul, like that might be one, something along those lines. And then the following week after that, I will be going through, and Aaron will kind of walk me through and ask the questions, and we'll kind of go through it in real time. The reason we're doing this is to kind of not only giving you the head knowledge, but actually showing you in real time what it could look like. Granted, like it's just the 2 of us, but it could be done in 3 or 4 or so on. And I'm sure certain things will be withheld due to the fact that this is going on the internet. But we will do our best to show vulnerability and kind of walk through these moments so that they make sense. So thank you, everyone. And we see you next week at Tuesday at 4.